What's up everybody, this is Ven, and I welcome you to the MOC Spotlight where we take apart what you build. For today's episode, we'll be going over the winner of the video game challenge, Nucleos, the Skull Warrior, created and posted on our message boards by Darknova3529. And in this episode, we'll be going over why I thought this was the most interesting creation to be submitted to the video game challenge that was proposed several weeks ago. Now before we get started, let me remind you about my method of reviewing, which involves a point system that is based on 3 fundamental attributes: the overall appearance of the MOC, the build of the MOC itself, and the concepts and ideas behind the MOC's creation. Each quality will mount up to 5 points, leading up to a final score that will be determined at the end of the episode. And please remember that this is all based on my opinion. Now let's get this started. For starters, gotta say, this is a pretty good looking MOC. There's a nice mix of light, vibrant colors, some neat little details here and there, and overall, a clean looking humanoid figure with a distinct silhouette. Now there are 2 main features on this MOC that really caught my eye, and they're both actually the same color, so I think it's fairly easy to guess what I'm talking about. The wings and the skirt. The wings themselves are a fairly unique design, maybe not the cleanest with all this Technic exposed, but that's only a minor issue I can pick out of them. And I say that's an issue because if you look at the rest of the MOC, everything is really well covered up by some sort of armor piece, mostly white armor, and it gives the MOC this sleek aesthetic that's actually kind of maintained throughout the entire MOC, aside from the wings, but it's not horrible looking or anything, it's just a minor thing I noticed, a nitpick more than anything, because aside from that, the wings look really cool. They kind of remind me of like a rib cage design, which is quite fitting for the character of the MOC. And then the skirt, first I gotta say, I'm a big fan of how it matches the color scheme of the wings, and kind of gives me the impression that these are just accessories to the MOC rather than an actual body part. You know, like these are just things that the figure is wearing. But yeah, no, I think the skirt is a pretty cool design, and if I had to make any complaint about it, it'd be like maybe it sticks out a little bit too much, just a little bit. Again, like the wings, I don't really have a big problem with it, but they're both features on the MOC that really add to its character. But let's take those away for a second and just look at the rest of the figure, which, again, looks pretty nice on its own merit. Has some decent looking proportions, a nice, concise design and aesthetic, but it definitely feels empty without these features. However, I do enjoy the design of the torso being so complex and having all these minute details thrown in there. I think this is really neat, and I kind of wish that the legs, more than anything, had this kind of aesthetic too. But at the same time, I do enjoy the legs as they are right now. What does throw me off a little bit are how wide the shoulders are. It's like everything else proportionally on this MOC looks fine. Like I even think that the arms are at a decent length, but these shoulders just look a little odd to me. Like I feel like the arms should be closer to the body than they already are, and this area definitely shouldn't be so gappy. It's not all that bothersome when you look at the MOC from other angles, but when you're looking at it from a frontal view, it is a little awkward. Another thing I don't find all too fitting about the torso is the use of the new 2015 armor piece here on like the belly area. It doesn't really seem all too appropriately placed here, and I think a different piece could have been used a lot more effectively. I think what it is the little bits of greeble in this piece that kinda messes with the white, smooth armor motif that this MOC has going for it. I don't know, but I can't help but think that a little bit of blue here would have been appropriate. Maybe something like the rib cage in the Skull Warrior's design, since that's kind of what this MOC is based on. And speaking of which, let's look at the skull. It's a skull with these weird green antenna thingies poking out of it. I don't think I'm a real big fan of it. Now, you could argue that, well, it's consistent with the little bits of green he has in the torso, but why green at all? Like, these are the only portions of the MOC that have green in them. But all in all, not too many big complaints I can make about the MOC. There are a few things that I think could have been improved on, but it looks really good. I thoroughly enjoy this MOC's design. Now as far as the build goes, this MOC also shines quite a bit here, at least in the torso. When it comes to the limbs, they're fairly fairly basic in design, you know, just your usual CCBS builds, attach a bone to a shell and so on and so forth. And it works, you know, at least these legs keep the MOC standing up and everything. And I definitely enjoy the part selection used on the legs, especially. But the torso is quite intriguing with all these little details and such thrown in there. It looks really well solidified, and I think it's quite impressive that the builder managed to fit all these CCBS parts into the build of the torso. Though I would have done the shoulders a bit differently because of my complaint earlier about them being too far apart. Everything here looks pretty good, like a nice clean job. The wings are put together in a fairly simple yet clever way, and I'm glad to see that they can actually be independently posed and whatnot, adding on to the MOC's already fairly decent amount of articulation. And speaking of which, you'd think that the skirt would also be a hindrance to the MOC's articulation, but it isn't really. It is also quite posable, because these parts are connected via ball joints. And heck, you could even choose to just pop these off if you really wanted to, which is a neat little feature in this MOC that I'm glad to see is even a thing. And as you may or may not have noticed by now, this MOC is capable of wielding various different weapons, all with an interesting and intricate design that make them well distinguishable from one another. And one in particular appears to be some sort of triple stud launcher. And what's really noteworthy is that it appears to be fully functional. Like, you can fire all of these just with the twist of one single knob. And that, folks, is a function. And it may be on an accessory of the MOC, but it's still a noteworthy function. And well, all that aside, this is a really solid figure, and there's not much else I can really say about the build. So let's move on to the concepts. So of course, this MOC was built with a purpose, and that purpose was to take on the video game challenge that I proposed in the Spotlight for the Protector of Rapture. And for the challenge, I proposed that the contestants must create something that is a crossover between a Bionicle character and a video game character of their choosing. And so for this MOC, Darknova chose to combine Skull Warrior and a character called Utsuho Ryuji. I know I'm horrible at pronouncing names, but this is a character from a game series called Toho. And thus, combining these two characters resulted in what we have as Nucleos, the Skull Warrior. And now, the resemblance to a typical Skull Warrior is already fairly obvious. You got the same weapons, the same face, some of the same parts and the same colors. However, it is also apparent that there are features from the video game character as well. The torso appears to have been designed to mimic the video game character's torso. Jeez, I don't want to have to keep saying video game character, but I just can't pronounce that name. I'll say Etsuo. I think that's okay. That's tolerable. And the most obvious feature that is translated in this MOC is the skirt. And meanwhile, some other aspects of this MOC's design were inspired by Etsuo's design, such as the arm cannon, and the leg armor here that kind of resembles her boots, and these green antenna thingies that I was complaining about earlier, which were actually inspired by her bow. That said, I think that could have been done better. And then there's of course the wings, which definitely take inspiration from Etsuo's design. Darknova managed to capture some of the more defining characteristics from both characters in this MOC, and it turned out looking pretty cool. And I actually like the idea of packing this MOC with so many different weapons, making it a true warrior, prepared for any sort of confrontation. And while there are some things that I would have done differently, overall I'd say the job was well accomplished. This is a really creative concept that is well executed, and overall meets my expectations for this contest. And so, let's now move on to the final scores. In terms of appearance, this MOC receives a 4 out of 5. I do have minor gripes with the set, and as minor as they are, there are several of them. But in the end, it is still a really good looking figure. Nice, colorful, vibrant, clean, with a creative design. In the end, it looks really good, but a couple of adjustments would make it look a lot better. In terms of the build, this MOC receives a 4.5 out of 5. Overall, it's a really solid build, does the job greatly, and it's really well articulated while also taking consideration into preventing restriction of such articulation. However, it's because of the way this MOC is built. In some areas it looks a little awkward in its final appearance, and I feel that this could have been avoided if it was built a little differently in said areas. So that's pretty much why I docked off half a point there, because aside from that there's nothing else I could see wrong with the build, but I can't ignore this flaw. And I also appreciate the inclusion of a function. And finally, that leaves us with the concept, which I then dictate 4 out of 5. The builder's ideas were really well executed. Not only did he manage to successfully combine these two different characters, but he got creative and made something really unique and nice to look at. It was built really well with a clever selection of parts, and the results are quite stunning. But however, there are some flaws with it, and they are quite awkward when you do notice them. So while there is still room for improvement, overall the MOC features some well-executed ideas. The builder got creative with it, and I can't stress enough how important creativity is, at least to me. So, we are then left with our final score, which adds up to a total of 12.5 out of 15. Great job, Dark Nova. You did really well on this one. And you're not alone. The rest of you guys that contributed to the challenge, I thank you all so much for participating. You guys also did a really great job. Heck, I even found it a little difficult to finally decide which one I found the most interesting, because some of you got really creative with your builds and designs, and that's something I was really looking forward to the most, was just to see how creative you guys would get with this. Creativity is the most important factor because it shows me how willing you are to throw out your craziest ideas and translate them into a Lego build, and that's what I find to be the most intriguing factor about any creation. Just the thought of what ideas the builder may have had while building it. So don't be afraid to let your imagination run wild. Don't let a bunch of crazy, huge MOCs on the internet discourage you from creating something at all. Just build, build, build. Keep on building. Seek inspiration. Learn how to improve. Just do what you feel like doing. And as far as how good your MOC turns out to be, that will all be determined by how you choose to approach it, because in the end, it all comes down to your ideas. I hope you guys take that note into the following year, and carry this with you as we approach several waves of new parts and new opportunities. So on that note, I'd like to thank you all for watching, and thank you for following the MOC Spotlight throughout its first year of being a thing. I look forward to seeing what you guys come up with throughout 2016, and of course I wish you all the best, and a happy new year. Also check out the message boards at board.ttvpodcast.com. Be sure to post your creations under the LEGO Creations category for a chance to be featured on the MOC Spotlight in the future. Sorry, just had to get that out of the way. And this is Ven. I'll see you all next time.